Hello, welcome to AP Government. I'm going to talk a little bit about federalism and just give you an overview of what you're going to read in Chapter 3. You may have started that already. In that case, hopefully watching this after you read the first 10 pages will help you make sense of that even more. If you haven't yet, then hopefully this is going to give you, the background you need, so that when you come across some of these terms, it will make sense. So what I have behind me, and I think you can see this, is the diagram that I used when we were talking about Locke and Hobbes and mob rule and tyrannical king, and that kind of sweet spot in the middle of social contract theory, which kind of said there needs to be a relationship. We're going to base that either on rights or on order or some mix thereof. Some of those same themes are going to roll around here as well. You can see that I cleaned up that image because when we talk about federalism, we're maybe not as concerned about rights and order and that debate. We are concerned about distribution of power, not decision-making power. So that other one was about decision-making power, who submits to be ruled and ruled over. That's decision-making power. This is distribution of power. And with federalism, we can still use the same kind of graphic, but we simplify it. On one end, decision-making power is held by a strong central government. A lot of times that would be a king who would just say, it's me. It's not the local governments. It's always me, because I am concerned with my power and consolidating that power. On the other extreme over here, we have weak central government. Obviously, that would probably be closer to mob rule, or certainly a rights-oriented if we moved into the social contract theory spectrum that we had talked about. We would see a weak central government over here. So at the same time that the framers of the Constitution were talking about decision-making power, who do we give power to? How do we prevent powers and factions and things like that? They were also kind of struggling with this idea of where are we going to distribute that power? Are we going to let the national government have more power? Or are we going to let the states have more power? Obviously, the founders of the Constitution were very motivated by this idea, like if we put that in a strong central government, we're going to gravitate towards a king. There's going to be a great deal of desire to kind of consolidate that. And they were running away from that when they went with the Articles of Confederation. They were definitely in a mode of, okay, let's stay away from that. But that didn't work. And so you had a national government with the Articles of Confederation that couldn't tax. There was no chief, no executive. It was hard to pass laws. It was hard to pay off debts. And so that situation wasn't working. And so when Madison starts to shape our Constitution, he is looking to push back. Now, and again, there's that epic debate, like, are we just going to end up with a king again or not? The system that they came up with is federalism, and that's what you're going to be reading about. It's complex because you're sharing power. And how do you share power? At the same time, how do you ultimately give power? Because you can't have a perfectly equal situation because, who wins in case of tie? Who decides? And so a couple of concepts are really going to come out in that first part of Chapter 3. One is the whole idea of the supremacy clause. And the supremacy clause, even though we live in this shared power kind of situation, which we call federalism, the Constitution and the federal government is supreme. Okay. However, they during the Bill of Rights, and we haven't gotten to that completely yet, but in the Bill of Rights, they also then give a lot of power back to the states in the 10th Amendment. Okay. And so those two pieces are going to kind of try to hold our Constitution and federalism right in the middle and not let it drift towards a strong central government. So the other terms that they're going to talk about are full faith and credit. And that means, what happens when something happens in another state. When somebody gets a license in another state, how does the other state recognize that? Some of those other ideas you really have to hold on to, especially as it relates to gay marriage. The full faith and credit clause becomes really important. What if somebody gets married in one state that allows gay marriage, and then they go to another state that doesn't. That in the last 30 or 40 years has been a kind of a key debate with the Constitution and federalism. And it's gotten bounced out to the Supreme Court. We will talk about that next chapter. Okay, but hopefully this little diagram and kind of me putting it in perspective can help you understand that part of the chapter. Now we need to talk over here about federalism, and I just want to talk you through. And I like visuals. I like to try to give your mind something to connect to when you're talking about some of these abstract concepts. So we were going to talk about this in class today, a regular government class today. But here's your kind of traditional graphic of federalism. So you have a national government here. You have the state governments here. You have a Venn diagram here. And enumerated powers, that is very important. The word enumerated means written out. They come specifically from Article 1, Section 8. When we talked about the Constitution, there's 18 listed powers there. And, some of them, for example, I didn't put all of them here, but, the power over the military is certainly a national government concern. Currency, national government concern. Treaties, post office, post roads, and on and on and on and on. Okay, Article 1, Section 8, enumerated powers. Also in here are implied powers, and that's going to be the national bank. That is going to be the Supreme Court case that I'll go over in another video, probably for this weekend. But then, they kind of have their powers. Over here you have the state powers. States are given everything else, according to the 10th Amendment. And that's why we call them reserved, because the 10th Amendment says all other powers are reserved to the states. That's going to be things like schools, police, courts, local laws, and local law enforcement. And so all of those powers are going to be reserved to the states. And then in the middle, you kind of have these concurrent laws. Originally, those are laws that are areas that both the federal and the state governments would have power over. Power to tax, things like that. Power to go into debt. Anyway, hopefully this makes sense. But then what happens, or at least this is the way the AP curriculum would talk about it for a long time. The new curriculum doesn't as much, but sometimes you'll hear this vocabulary. When our country first started, we were very good about just kind of keeping things separate. And your book will call it dual federalism. Dual federalism, like, okay, this is the national sphere, this is the state sphere, and we don't mix them up much at all, or if at all. And sometimes that's called a layer cake federalism. So here you can see my lovely piece of cake. And you see the federal, certainly there are federal rules. We could put these federal things down here. And then we see state rules. And we could put the state rules or state laws down here, the things that state has oversight over. So this is called layer cake federalism. What has happened over time, though, and with some worry by some people, is you start to get situations where the federal government certainly started to engage itself more with the states, and so, for example, the federal government would get more and more involved in schools through Title I math and reading, through school lunch programs, through No Child Left Behind, things like that. And so suddenly you see this kind of mixing there. And also with that, certainly with certain kinds of police issues and crimes, more and more things become federal crimes as well as state crimes. And so the federal government kind of gets mixed up there. States traditionally have been in charge of roads. All local roads were certainly state government things. But what has happened is the federal government has gotten more and more involved in roads, interstate highway system in the 1950s, in grants and things like that. Because of that mixing, and especially started in the late 1800s, but it really ramped up during FDR in the New Deal, because the federal government was wanting to fix problems that were happening in our economy. You get what we call marble cake federalism down here, and I could, if I wanted to, kind of draw a line down here. And so what has happened in the last 70 years or so, we see this layer cake federalism, or not layer cake, but marble cake federalism, where there's kind of a mixing of the federal and state, and so you get a marble cake with kind of chocolate dough and a vanilla dough, and it gets all kind of mixed together. Okay. By the way, we call that cooperative federalism. There's a lot more cooperation, a lot more kind of just mixing of federal and state rules. So that's what happened. Now, for people who were concerned about, like, is this appropriate? We can call it cooperative federalism, but really it's federalism that's pushing more to the power of the national government. There was some concern by constitutional people, who said, you know what, I'm not sure that's what the Constitution intended. What you tended to see then, and your book's going to talk about this, is devolution, okay? De-evolution, and that is when we're evolving back to putting more power back to the states, okay? More power back to the states. Certainly Ronald Reagan starts that. Again, conservatives are going to tend to want more power in local governments, not in the federal government. Ronald Reagan really starts that in the 1980s, and that continues. One of the ways that really shows itself, and the book's going to talk about this, is block grants. So what was happening during cooperative federalism here is the federal government wasn't overly involved in states, other than the fact that it gave them tons of money and then tons of requirements as well. Like, you will raise your drinking age to age 21, but then we're going to give you lots of money for roads. Or if you do this, this, and this, you're going to get lots of money for your schools. And what has happened recently with this move towards devolution, to give power back to the states, is the federal government is still giving money because a lot of the states really need that, but they come in the form of block grants. And block grants are just simply ways where the federal government is saying, you know what, we don't want to become too powerful here, but we know you need the money. But rather than giving you money and saying you need to use it for this, this, and this, we're just going to give you the money and say you can use it for whatever you want. You can exercise your power as you see fit. And that is a way that we in the country are starting to give money back to the states. Okay? Or not money, but give power back to the states while maintaining that pipeline of funding that a lot of states need. Okay. By the way, that's going to come up in a lot of FRQs where there's these kind of FRQs where you're going to have to talk about this epic struggle of, like, weak central government, strong central government. What are some evidence why, we are moving towards this way, or what is some evidence that we might be moving this way? And obviously evidence that the federal government is really powerful is the Supremacy Clause, the National Bank, things like that. Things that kind of show that power still resides in the states, the 10th Amendment, block grants, things like that. So as you read, you want to look for those. Where are ways, or how do I see things that are showing that either the federal government can get more power, or ways that the federal government is being limited in its power to do too much? Just a brief video that hopefully you can watch and make sense. And then as you read the chapter, I don't provide a lot of the details, but hopefully the details that you read, then you can really kind of latch onto and say, oh, these details make sense within the context of everything we're talking about. Thank you very much.